This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Hey, good afternoon, America. Steve Laffey here. Christmas week. Christmas is on Wednesday this week. It's Monday, 23rd of December. And between today and tomorrow, I think we've got some good shows for you. They'll be different in tones, I'm sure. Today's a very serious topic. And so is tomorrow. Tomorrow will be our Christmas show. But we can be a little lighthearted, too, and during Christmas and not just always be so somber. But today is a show that I must say, it's very hard for me to get ready for. We're going to talk about the persecutions of Christians. We're going to especially talk about what's happening in Egypt. And I had been baffled. If you're listening to us at LaffeyRadio.com, you know, we're very appreciative. We know it's over an off week. We'll do a show today. We'll do a show tomorrow, Tuesday, live, today and tomorrow, not on Christmas Day and not the rest of the week. We'll do the best of on Thursday and Friday. Be back Monday with another couple of shows before we get ready for the new year, of course. And then we'll be back right in the following Monday with brand new shows. We're on Facebook. We know you've been liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter. And I'm hearing back from a lot of people who are listening to the show and listening to it at different times. Listening to it in the evening, which is great. Listening to it on the self-loading app. You know, putting Laffey Radio on your iPhone. It comes in, you can listen to the show. The Laffey Minutes, which we'll put up all this week, even Christmas Day. We'll preload those, and we won't make Boss do them on Christmas morning. He's going to be opening presents and so forth. But we'll put them up every day. The Fixing America Presents, we'll hold off this week's and put it up next week. But there's some good ones there. We just did one on the minimum wage. We got a lot of feedback on. So, but I was and looking at what's happening in Syria in the last, and the Middle East has been in the news. But I've been handed some articles and sent some articles about, especially what's happened in Egypt, but what's been happening all over the world recently in the past 10 years and so with the persecution of Christians. And why, when the stories come out, and by the way, almost all the stories don't come out, why do they always seem like random events? So a church gets burned over here. Another church is destroyed. Someone's killed. Could be name the Middle Eastern country. Certainly we hear about things in North Korea randomly, you know. Remember, they have hundreds of thousands of Christians in prison, tortured, dead. And by the way, one of the things that comes up, it's always, when you talk about this discussion, a lot of it will be about what extreme Islamists are doing. But it's not always that way when it comes to persecution of Christians. In North Korea, it's not because of that. They just want to wipe them out. For totalitarian reasons, crazy dictators. They just shot. I don't know if you saw the news where, even though this basketball player keeps showing up in North Korea, the new leader of that country, he just shoots his uncle, dead, just nuts. So, but China, of course, is not because of Islam. China is wants to be a totalitarian regime, communist country. And they want to control people. They're going to let them have certain free markets, mostly owned by the state, especially the big companies. But they don't want, and we'll go through that. There's a new book came out, The Global War on Christians by Allen, which I had not heard of, but I had seen. And so I got the book, and we'll do a little bit out of his book. But first, let's talk about what happens in Egypt, because I think it's, I didn't know much about the Coptics. And if you don't know anything about it, this is a show where sometimes people tune in. And when I'm talking about finance, it's been my whole adult life, right? And government deficits and pensions and so forth. And while being a Christian, I don't know much about the Coptics, so I spent a lot of time over the weekend, researching them, listening to some different videotapes. But the Coptics are sort of the word means Egypt, and if you go back, just don't anything back, go back to the Old Testament. In fact, Egypt is in the Old Testament. Not as much as Jerusalem or what is present-day Israel, but second most. You remember Abraham. You remember Joseph going to Egypt. You remember Moses coming out of Egypt and crossing the Red Sea. So the Coptics, their religion is based upon the first one of the four books of the Gospel. One of them by Mark, and Mark is their martyr of the church. And he went, supposedly, we don't really know all of this fact, like we do a lot of things, but went to Egypt and was martyred there. And, of course, Jesus did go to Egypt. We know that as a baby, in a dream. In fact, this is Matthew, second book of Matthew. So Egypt is an extremely important country for Christians. The Coptics have been there since all these times. And there are places in Egypt, I went and looked this up, where they really think Jesus was. He was in this cave, with Joseph and his mother Mary. So if you go to Matthew 2, after the visit of the Magi, after the kings had gone, and by the way, we always talk about 3 kings. This is a little trivia quest, but we don't know how many came. The Magi who came, they went and saw Herod. They in a dream they said, "Don't go back to Herod." But when they were gone, in Matthew 2:13, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So they got up, took the child and mother in the night, left for Egypt, where they stayed until the death of Herod, which people think was about another 3.5 years. So it's a very important place. And if you look at the Coptics today, in fact, I was watching some video where, I grew up a Roman Catholic, so you watch a video of the Coptics, and they just elected recently, last year or so, a new pope, and they do it out in the open. And they don't have smokes coming up in the back, and no one knows who it's going to be. They got 3 people running, and a child comes up, and out of tradition, because it's a child, he picks a number out or a name out in a ball, and there they got a new pope. And the guy is like a 61-year-old pharmacist. So it's really wonderful to see them and see how happy they are in certain ways and so forth. But then you get to the serious nature of what's happened over there, where over the years and years, and by the way, when they had a dictator, things weren't as bad. In fact, things weren't bad as, and we'll get into this, weren't as bad for Christians in Iraq when they had a dictator. Things weren't as bad for Christians in Syria when Assad ruled the entire country, because these people weren't that concerned about the Coptics. It's when there's been this changeover, these call them revolutions, Arab Spring, whatever you want to call it. It has been terrible for Christians in this area. And in fact, basically they're being wiped out. And they've left, in fact, in Iraq, they think almost, not all of them, but most Christians have left. I'm still puzzled of where they all go to. Can't all be in Turkey. They're not certainly all in America. We don't in America recognize them as a persecuted minority, which in many cases they are. So we'll take in, Islamic from Somalia and give them a town in Lewiston, Maine, or wherever they go. We won't do the same for Christians. So on a serious note, and not everybody will like to have a serious note on Christmas week because everybody's out shopping still and so forth, but that's not what we're doing here at Laffy Radio. I thought you just get to know some of the kids, and my friend Louis Freed does this about soldiers every day who've been killed every day. Just reads off their names and where they're from, and listening to his show, it's always very sobering. But here's just 5 kids. Here's how they were killed. Here's a Coptic Christian boy, Cyril Yusuf Saad, abducted, held for ransom. His family paid off the Muslim kidnapper, Abdel Salam. He still killed the child and threw his body in the sewer of the house. You'll find this a lot, by the way, especially in it looks like in the Middle East, where I guess one way to really say these people aren't worth anything is to throw them in a sewer, throw them down a well. They paid 30,000 Egyptian pounds to the abductor, who still killed the innocent child. That's Cyril. Then you have Sami. This is just all happening now, last couple of months. There's hundreds of these, but I'll just tell you about 5. Sami George, last name George. He's an altar boy at a Coptic church, a servant of the Christ, in Minya, Egypt. Kidnapped by quote-unquote unknown persons on his way to church. There's a pattern here, by the way. Kids are being taken, abducted, girls are being abducted on their way to church, to frighten people from going to church. To participate in the holy prayers up to the Orthodox Easter they have. His parents and family reported it was his custom to go to church and worship in the evening, but he didn't return. They began to panic. They received an anonymous phone call from kidnappers that they would execute him unless they received 250,000 Egyptian pounds. Here's another one named Abanab Ashraf, kidnapped in front of his church, St. Paul. His abductors, 4 men, put a knife to his throat, dragged him to the car, called the boy's family demanding money for ransom. All on the way to church. By the way, here's a girl. Agape Isam Gurgis went to school accompanied by a Muslim social worker and 2 teachers. Never returned. They handed her over to a family and a church priest where she stayed for some time after protests due to the terrible ordeal she experienced during her abduction. She was drugged and awakened to find herself in a secluded place with an elderly woman who tried to convert her to Islam and beat her and put her in the full, I can't say the word, but the full Islamic dress where you cover your whole body. Then you've got Sarah. Look at all these Christian names too. You know, it's funny. I can't say her last name. Abdelmaked. Abducted on her way to school. Smuggled across the border of Egypt, this is not unusual, where the Coptic Christians are also being brutalized. We don't get hardly any stories out of Libya. I mean, and she was converted into Islam. The new pope called it a disgrace. Anyway, I could read you 550 documented cases like this, it looks like, over the last year and a half. Either death, killed, forced conversion of Christian women, forced marriages. Here's the president of Coptic Solidarity, Adel Gindi. Quote, any objective and fair review of the cases of forced conversion of Coptic girls, which started 4 decades ago, but dramatically escalated after January 2011 when the Arab Spring reached Egypt, show a clear pattern of events that point to well-organized hidden hands, not random events, by the way, not just random people see a girl walking down the street, oh, let's get this one girl, behind the process. This is important. Amazingly, he says, the collusion of Egypt's security as well as judiciary authorities in defiance of the existing laws concerning minors shows the extent of the scheme. It's part of a war of attrition against Copts in their homeland. So there are many, many, many more of these. I mean, there's 3 girls right here. I mean, you could get it all personal. There's 5 of the 550 documented cases. Now, we know that, by the way, the Coptics did not want to live under Islamic law, under Morsi. And so they supported the military takeover. And so since that time, and we'll go through this after the break, church after church, torn to pieces, looted, people killed. And it's not just in Egypt, it's now everywhere. And it's part of a movement, not a random event that's been going on, especially the last several years. But it's been going on for a long time. And these people just live in fear. You know, as we're talking about here in America today, what's the big story? I mean, I'm not saying I don't know anything about these Duck Dynasty people. I've never watched the show, just heard a couple of reports where the elder, I don't know what he said. I don't know if he said things right or said them wrong, but it's all over the news. He's alive. He's been paid a lot of money. Whether the family shows up at the show, I couldn't care less, by the way. I don't watch the show. I don't know what it's about. But that's what grabs the news. Not this. Not ever. You would think that all the things I'm going to talk about in the show today, when we come back from the break, are all these random events. When they don't seem to be random. It seems to be just pure evil around the world, uniting together against Christians. And we as a country don't even acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge, again, I've talked about China so many times, we don't acknowledge what they do in China to Christians. We don't acknowledge how they prop up the worst perpetrators in North Korea of anti-Christian tyrants. We never talk about it. And we still, again, to say it again, give them a 40% discount on every trade. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're talking about Christian persecution in modern day times, starting off talking about the Coptic Christians. It's LaffeyRadio.com. It's Christmas week. It's a tough topic. I'm not an expert in it, but we're going to go through it today, and we need to come to some conclusions about it. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the The ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, rice. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty Five. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest, I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Many early Christian communities settled in Egypt, but 16 centuries ago there was a separation. From that division came the Coptic Church. It follows the religious tradition that was practiced by the descendants of Egyptian pharaohs. During the 10th International Congress of Coptic Studies in Rome, speakers talked about the historical legacy of these Christians. It's one of the churches that separated from the Roman and Byzantine Church in the 5th and 6th century. Currently, the Coptic Church is very strong, even though historically the majority of the population became Muslim.
Steve Laffey here. We're back. Steve Laffey's Fixing America, found on LaffeyRadio.com. Also check us out on Facebook and Twitter, Laffey Radio. We've got a show today. We're talking about in general terms, Christians being slaughtered in Egypt by radical Muslims, but it's more than that. It's sort of around the world today, and that was just a little bit on the Coptics and the history of the Coptics, which is the same thing as saying Egypt. In the olden days, was that they were there, and they've been there forever. And I think, when you think about their reaction, I tried to find clips of what's happening now with the Coptics. They really don't fight back, which is surprising to say to American. But their history of martyrdom, from the beginning of the church with Saint Mark, all the way through. How they do their calendar of martyrs. They've had their expectations are over there. Unlike in America, that's why we're doing this show. Like in America, my expectation when I get up in the morning is I go to any church I want. If I want to go to synagogue, go to synagogue. It doesn't matter. And there's plenty different, even within the Christian faith here, there's so many different churches within 15 miles of where I sit. That's my expectation. My expectation is that I'm going to go down the road and I'm going to walk in. My car is going to be safe when I walk out. My kids are going to be okay if they wander over there. My wife's going to be okay going earlier than I do, say one day to Sunday school. I'm going to be okay at prayer breakfast tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. with the 10, 20, 30 guys who show up. men's prayer breakfast. We take it for take it for granted so much that it's hard to imagine. It's only when I start seeing the faces, and maybe that's the personal nature we need to add. And I began to think, these aren't all random events. I mean, here's another article here. This is the Washington Times. Coptic Christians dying in Egypt and no one notices. I guess someone noticed. He wrote the article, but nobody notices. There were. Some people thought there were many more than there's 80 million people in Egypt. Roughly, most people think there's about 8 million Coptic Christians. Some people think there's double that amount. But in the end, at the rate they're going, there won't be any of them. They're just being slaughtered. I mean, since the military took back over the government from Morsi, and from when Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood leader, the guys that got in there when of course this really goes back to the President of the United States today. Does he want it to be this way? Don't they know it's much worse for these people? I mean, look what's going on in Egypt today after Mubarak got out. From the years that's gone by, it's been terrible. All we do is watch scenes. Here's another article, Washington Times. Not that anybody is noticing, but Christians are being slaughtered in Egypt on a daily basis. This just comes out, this is October. Last Sunday, 4 Christians died and many others were wounded during a wedding at a church of the Virgin Mary. 2 of the dead were innocent young girls, 12 and 8. July, 10-year-old girl was shot and killed while walking home from Bible class. Another example. That's where they get them, going in and out of churches. Make them scared to go to churches. I guess he says this article says it's happening every day in the Muslim world. Every day. He goes on to say that Barack Obama had a pro-brotherhood leaning from the outset, which is the primary reason why Christian murders and church burnings in Egypt get nothing more than lip service, and while failed foreign policy has virtually destroyed a 30-year treaty with a much-needed ally in the Middle East. I mean, I don't know about, he goes on to say, this is what his opinion, Obama's methodology is simple. He either ignores the mounting Christian attacks or feigns his condemnation. If killing 4 Americans in Benghazi was not enough to get the president's attention and focus, why should nameless, faceless Christians be his concern? I mean, it just goes on and on. The article goes on and on, until you read where you got people in the administration. When Morsi was overthrown, somebody had better take the brunt of Muslim Brotherhood anger. Who better than the Coptic Christians? This is true. Nobody pays any attention to them. They're just Christians after all. And he goes on to attack Obama in the article. After his first inauguration, President Obama invited the president of Islamic Society of North America at the time, Ingrid Mattson, to offer a prayer at the National Cathedral. No big deal, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe not. After all, the Islamic Society of North America, the ISNA, admits it has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is also linked to Hamas. And then Valerie Jarrett, she showed up as a keynote speaker at the National Convention in 2009. So you have it within our administration, but it's really not a blame in my case of the administration per se. It's really us. It's really the media. It's really how we do the news. And to see all this stuff happening, and it's really us. It's 200 and some odd million supposedly Christians in America. There's got to be, Catholics, Protestants, people who say they are but don't go to church. We do nothing about this. We do more about preserving the Canadian geese, the big fat Canadian geese that are destroying all your golf courses. We do more about that than these people being slaughtered all over all over. That's not the Middle East. I mean, it's seemingly everywhere. Here we are today. Here's another. The largest massacre of Christians in Syria was ignored in Sadat. We get a lot on this. We can talk about this all day long, but it just ignored. I mean, I didn't know about it until I started researching this show. 45 Christians killed, some thrown again into a well. Videotape. I watched part of this videotape where they're just screaming out, and I don't know what they're saying, but Allah Akbar, which John McCain equates to Christians saying thank God. And they have just graphic atrocities. As these, by the way, were the rebels in Syria who we were backing at the beginning. I don't know if we're backing him. Who knows what's going on in Syria? They're the people doing this. Under Assad, and this is no defense of Assad, who's a mass murderer, but he didn't go after these Christians the way that the rebels are. They weren't caught in the middle. I mean, I got articles after article after article, and we're still talking just in the Middle East. And the Coptics are taking the worst of the brunt, the biggest brunt of what's happened, and then no one's protecting them. The church after church being destroyed. There's videotapes where rocket launches are hitting a church. And the Coptics are losing church after church, people being stolen from them. Here's, Christians being slaughtered in Egypt by radical Islamists. On Friday, this is just, literally a couple of weeks ago, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom called on the Egyptian government to crack down on religious targeting. That's it. That's all we do. The level of violence against Coptic Christians, their property and business is unprecedented, both in its scope and the number of churches and structures attacked. This is back in August. It's worse today. This could portend even worse violence ahead if the situation is not brought under control. Assaulting religious minorities is not a legitimate form of protest. Morsi supporters killed a taxi driver who had a Christian cross on his dashboard. I mean, it just person after person, young person after young person, family after family. What would it be like for any of us to have our daughter wander off, never come back? I mean, those are random events in some ways. These are not, in America, I mean, not random, I mean, in a sense, but they happen now and then. We do Amber Alerts. But in Egypt, there's a whole group of people, the majority people, who are doing this or letting it happen to 8 million people. Today, now, like literally right now, this week. And you've got these rebels in Syria who are going after towns like Sadat, which we'll talk about more length later. It's not just that; it's Saudi Arabia. They have a history of total cruelty to Christians. And they're supposed to be one of our allies. So they can't be one of our allies. Not that we don't use people and they use us in foreign policy to get things done that we need, but why don't we call this out? Where are Christian churches in America? I mean, always sending off a missionary and talking about tough places. Where are we in talking about doing this with our government to not allow this to happen? There's a systematic slaughter in article after article, but the articles themselves seem to be random. There's an article here, and generally they're not on the mainstream. I guess if you still refer to it as mainstream, they're not there. They're not. I mean, CBS did a little thing on it, but it never went into the horrors of what goes on. It went to the history of the Coptics. You can watch that online. I did. But the horrors of what go on is really not reported. Not in any way, shape, or form like it would be if it was a different topic. And certainly not if it was something happening in this country to say Muslims, which is not happening. Be all over the news. But we need to make it rise to a level that people pay attention, and then somehow it stops. But we have actually, it seems as though we've made it worse. Our actions in the Middle East have obviously made this worse. Not that it was good before, it wasn't good before, but we've made it worse. Here's the U.S.-supported Islamic rebels. This is like, we could go through this, just read the rest of the time. I'll do it after the break, but we'll start up with some of the clips that we have. I haven't done any of them. But this gets me this is the week of Christmas, and this is what we chose to talk about today, and it gets me really, really upset that this is actually going on in the world and I'm safe in my home. And so we do a broadcast on a topic like this that no one will do, to read off the names of children, to tell you what's going on, and we come back from the break, we'll spread this around to not just the Coptics, but to what's happening around the world to Christians. It's persecution that goes on. It's Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army Strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared.
It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs.
I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Saudi Arabia is one of the worst persecutors of Christians in the Middle East. It's a problem that's getting worse throughout the region. CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell spoke with one expert who says the U.S. is not doing enough to stop it.
Since 2003, attackers have bombed 70 churches in Iraq alone, and that's only the beginning.
We're seeing a very vicious attack on Christians in a number of countries.
Religious freedom activist Nina Shea says this affects the 2 largest Christian populations in the Middle East.
About 2/3 of the Christians in Iraq have already left. In Egypt, we're just beginning to see those with green cards, those with visas are fleeing.
What we're describing for you here, Steve Laffey's Fixing America, is a systematic eradication of Christians throughout much of the Middle East. And over the last 10 years, it's actually happened. Just heard a report where 2/3 of Christians in Iraq have left. I have no idea where they are. Where did they go? Where could they go? How are they living? They can't all be in Turkey. And yet we have an administration sort of before that where we sort of ignore all this. It's like a given now for the foreign policy experts, not all of them, obviously. It's sort of a given for the people at the top, guys who are running for president, guys who have run for president, that we're just going to have to forget about this part and do our best because, Saudi Arabia is supposedly a great ally of ours. Listen to Hillary Clinton, by the way. She loves Saudi Arabia. Here's Hillary Clinton.
The U.S. is strengthening its ties to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a historic enemy of Iran and a strategic counterbalance in the Middle East. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton met with the Saudi Arabian defense minister in Washington this week. She highlighted the importance of a strong relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. The Saudi official said he looks forward to continuing the excellent relationship between the two countries. Yeah,
we're going to continue that excellent relationship. Listen, it's one thing to say that for strategic purposes, we've got to do something. It's another thing to just ignore systematic murder and elimination of a whole group of people. And yet, because most of America is Christian, or seemingly Christian, nominally Christian at least, most of America still is, that we think, I don't know what we think. I mean, we're 200 and some odd Christians, supposedly in America. We have a giant problem. There's 60 million or so evangelical Christians. Half are registered to vote, half aren't. They have no clue. Not even interested. How are you going to change this if you don't even vote? The other half who are registered, according to one report I looked at from my buddy Dan out in Texas, they don't vote. So you're left with like 40 some odd million Christians not having any political impact on what could happen in other countries, what our policy should be. It's totally amazing. Listen, here's some. We're not going to play all these clips if I don't get to them, but here's some other countries who aren't really doing a great job.
In Saudi Arabia, most Christians are foreign workers. No churches are allowed, and Shea says the government is even hunting down people who pray in their homes. Shea says it's not just the Middle East.
There is a radicalization of Islam going on throughout the world, and this is having an impact on the tolerance that there is for non-Muslims.
Those countries include Nigeria, North Korea, China, Vietnam, and Pakistan. Yet this widespread persecution is largely ignored by the mainstream media.
Totally ignored, basically. Here's, for example, that was Nina Shea. She's at the Hudson Institute, and we'll play one more clip for her in a second. But I just wanted to just move over to China for a second as we look at some of these other countries. Here's just a report. Chinese Christians lawyers attacked in presence of foreign TV crews. Whereabouts of 17 church members still unknown. This happens all the time in China. All the time. I mean, the church leader, they say, was pushing the boundaries of what might be deemed appropriate for a church leader within the government sanctions. They have these government-sanctioned churches. As long as you bow down to communism, you can have a church. But many, many don't. Millions don't. And by the way, the interesting thing is that around 1945, according to John Allen's book over here, I thought this fascinating. In 1949, there was about 900,000 Protestants in the country, in China. Today, there are 111 million Christians in China, roughly 90% Protestant. It would make China the third largest Christian country on earth, followed only by the United States and Brazil. So with all the persecution, the amount of, these people have to meet, by the way, in basements. They get caught. I mean, it goes to, some people get caught in China. I won't want to plagiarize this guy's book, but, I could take one page, I guess, in a paragraph. Here on page 73, I've been going through this book. But, in 2000, it goes through time to time to time. He just takes different persecution of Christians. February 2011, more than 100 riot police officers in tandem with some local hoodlums raided a house where there were 20 Christians were meeting. They destroyed the video cameras, the audio recorders, the mobile phones. It was a site for religious activities without approval, said the authorities. Go on all day long. It's all throughout this guy's book about the persecution of Christians in all these different countries. By the way, the Hindus. You think of Mother Teresa operating out of India, but there are sects within that who are totally persecuting Christians today, and it's not as widespread as it is in some of these other countries. North Korea. I mean, we know China props up North Korea, and we also know that North Korea may be probably worse than Saudi Arabia. What's worse than North Korea? You get caught with the Bible, you're in a slave labor camp, you're killed, you never get out. That's the way it is. And there are people, think of the bravery. There are people still passing Bibles. There are people bringing Bibles into that country. Christian missionaries from here, risking their lives to get someone a Bible. Talk about brave. It's Christmas week. Talk about brave. Talk about heroes. And they become martyrs. They don't get out. Some of them don't get out. Here's Nina Shea one more time about some solutions she offers. She's at the Hudson Institute.
Shea specifically points to the U.S. as not doing enough, especially in Egypt.
We can use quiet diplomacy. We can use more public statements to signal that it matters to us, that we're not indifferent, that it's not a green light for them to continue killing Christians and disrespecting their worship. So I think that we have a lot of levers to pull, and we just need to start doing it.
That's Nina Shea from the Hudson Institute talking about, and again, all she's really, what were her solutions? Quiet diplomacy and public statements. We don't even do that. So the real purpose of this show is to get you to start thinking. Got me to start thinking. One, why the stuff isn't in the news, we should know about it. We should be concerned about it. We should have a president and a Congress that talks about it. And we should make sure that the people we deal with, let me ask you all a question, just the people you deal with on a daily basis. Like, I've sold a property to a part of this property that I live on to a guy. I wouldn't have sold it to a guy who I knew to be a man of really bad standing. One, it would have been a pragmatic reason. He probably would have welched on a deal. I sold it to a group of people who were all the way through some of the nicest people I ever met. All was upstanding. I mean, total businessman. We had disagreements, lawyers getting involved, to make sure we had the thing written down right. Totally great people. And had nothing but, great relationship with them now. Keep an eye on their property. But do you deal with people that you know are gonna be in charge of like heinous violence to a group of people? Do you do that? I mean, there's some cases as a government, we have to deal with everybody in some way or form. By not dealing with them, we're dealing with them. And we have to have a very concerted foreign policy. And I've done a show on foreign policy where we talked about this, where, look at the countries, by the way. Let's start naming them. Okay. China, North Korea. We talked about them already today. Iran, we haven't even bothered with them today, but they're part of the Syria. Russia. Russia, of course, allows a lot more religious freedom than it used to. But in knowing we have to deal with these people, we should know that this is what's going on in the world. That this is not some random event, as people would try to let us think that it is. In fact, we'll play one more from Nina Shea before we take a break. Here's Christians, and we talked a little about this earlier. Were Christians better than some of the dictators that preceded this whole movement in the Arab Spring and so forth?
For years, Middle East Christians lived under the protection of longtime dictators. The so-called Arab Spring ended that with the overthrow of regimes like Egypt's Hosni Mubarak.
The old secular order, even though it was a dictatorship, military dictatorship at that, very oppressive for them, they nevertheless were able to have churches and to pray as Christians. Now they're concerned that they can no longer do that.
And where are the Muslim groups in this country when all this happens on a daily basis? All the moderate Muslim groups. I can't find one, and maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I got the internet. I'm not the greatest searcher on Google. Maybe there's a giant movement among Muslims in this country to decry, protest, stamp out, eliminate the persecution against Christians in some of these countries that these people have come from. I don't see it. Not politically correct to probably say it. I just don't see it. Maybe there is. I'd be stand corrected. Put it on Facebook. Send me the email. Let me know. Where are those people saying, hey, wait a second. We know this is going on. It's not us. We think it's wrong. We want to help you. We're petitioning the federal government to make sure it doesn't happen. We're holding up what we have to hold up in these different countries. We're certainly not going to back these rebels that have gone into Sudan and basically murdered and murdered a whole group of people. Systematic. I mean, if when this happened in the 30s, when we didn't know about it, we're all the cry, and of course we should have been. I mean, there was 6 million Jews killed. It was the worst Holocaust of all time. And we did nothing back when that was happening. What did we really do about it until we figured it out? Really figured it out. But some people knew. People had to know. Anyway, we got to take another break. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll be right back. Check us out on Facebook. We'll LaffeyRadio.com. We'll have one more break. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood, and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
I think that at the moment there is a crisis in the Arab world because of the Arab Spring. The question is where the Arab Spring is going, nobody knows. But basically, the Christian community of the Middle East is emptying out. And there is a great deal of apprehension because they don't know what the future brings. If you look under Islamic rule, at first there was a period in which there was a thriving of the Christian community under Islamic rule because they worked together establishing the Arab civilization. When the Crusades came, the majority of the people of the Middle East were Christian. When they left 100 years later, they then become a minority.
That's Yvonne Haddad out of Georgetown University. Steve Laffey here. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Thank you for being here on Monday of Christmas week, December 23rd. We appreciate it. We've done a show, and we're going to finish up the show talking about, we're talking about the Coptics at the beginning of the show, but we're spreading it around. But as Yvonne Haddad has just says, and by the way, she's no conservative, it looks like. She's got a lot of different thoughts about all the mistakes that have been made. I watched a bunch of clips of her over at Georgetown University. Fascinating lady. But she is talking about how Christians are emptying out of the Middle East. I mean, the persecution is so bad that they're leaving. And if they can get out, how do they all get out? They can't all get out. But it's not always. I mean, we'll play some more clips. It's not always just the murders that we need to talk about. Well, those are important. I mean, extremely important. It's not just the destruction of the churches, some of them so old and historic, that's going on in the Middle East. But just everywhere where you can look now, I'm starting to put pieces together. I mean, for example, here, just like a couple of days ago, Wall Street Journal. Malaysia rules that Catholic paper can't use the word Allah. I guess Allah, according to the Christians over there, they refer to as God. They use the word Allah. Can't do it. It's feigning concern about the way Islam is growing as a political force in Malaysia, where Muslims historically have practiced a more moderate form of faith than found in the parts of the Middle East. but where some ethnic Bali politicians are using Islam as a way to exert, their power, their dominance. It says, quote, in a complex multiracial society. It goes on. But these are things that are happening all the time. The ruling, by the way, by the judge, it's a common finding that usage of the word Allah is not an integral part of the faith and practice of Christianity, which it is not. Said the ruling from a 3-member judge to allow the Herald to use the word Allah, newspaper, would have been unconstitutional. One of the lawyers, the 6 Islamic state councils which opposed the use of the word by non-Muslims. I mean, this is a little thing, supposedly, right? It's not that little. Here's another one, by the way. I know I've talked about this guy. This is Chinese dissident Chen Guangcheng. This is the blind man that the Chinese leadership beat. They beat him with a stick. And he found his way. It was Christians who smuggled him out. He's a Christian. He's pro-life. Ended up at New York University for a year, where I guess he caused them a lot of problems because of his faith. A lot due to the fact that NYU, New York University, is expanding into China, right? And so they basically kicked him out. And he says that they're forcing him out. So it's not just one. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in different parts of the world. We can read where 12 were killed in attacks against the church in southern Syria. Okay, that's the murder. Here's a jihad on Jesus. Militants firebomb new Christ statue in ancient monastery in Syria. This is like 2 weeks ago, right? This is in Syria now. This is not in Sabad where they killed all these people. Earlier this month, Islamist-led opposition in Syria broadcast a video clip of militants threatening the nation's Christian minority with a focus on this monastery, the Cherubim Monastery, and the Lord Jesus statue. In the video, images of militants firing rockets at the ancient monastery and setting the building on fire appeared. It was unclear whether they took down the statue of Jesus Christ. During the video clip, Islamic chanting is heard and Quran verses recited. So we can go into that, but it's in America here where NYU is forcing out Guangcheng. They probably thought it was great to have him, and now because of his stance, everybody's accusing him of being led around. I mean, spiritually led around by the far right, but they don't want him around because they're expanding into China. So we kowtow all the time to these things. Let's listen a little bit more to Yvonne Haddad. We only have a couple minutes left here on the show. Here's her clip here about the ethnic cleansing of Christians in Iraq.
In Iraq, we've had ethnic cleansing of Christians. Their churches have been bombed, and the majority of the Iraqi Christians have emptied out of Iraq. My relatives who have relatives in Homs said that every church in Homs has been destroyed or desecrated, and most of the Christian community.
So Yvonne, I mean, this has actually happened to now literally millions of people, forced from their homes, had to move, churches destroyed. It's not just the Coptics. Well, they're a great example of what's happened, and they probably didn't know what to do when Morsi was in. I mean, things were getting worse then. Of course, they wanted the military's been running since Nasser, Egypt. Whether they put in the right person, the person that they want. They allowed Morsi to come in. Morsi's going to go to jail. Morsi's in jail. He'll stay in jail, I guess, and maybe they'll execute him. I don't know what they'll do with him. But now the Muslim Brotherhood has declared basically all-out war on the Coptics in Egypt. Here's a couple more clips we should play about getting out of Egypt or converting to the Muslim religion here by Professor Haddad.
We know that in Egypt, during periods of stress, a lot of Christians have emigrated out of Egypt, and some have converted to Islam because it's very convenient. If you become a Muslim, you have more privileges. Today in the Arab world, in Egypt, in Syria, and in Jordan, the Christians emphasize the most important thing is we are of the land, we are indigenous, we were here before you guys came. Together we have formed this society. We are not foreigners. We are not the product of missionary activity. And that is the message.
Wow. I mean, just forced out. Or you know, some people just give in and convert. What a terrible life. I mean, what a, look at the misery. Think about it when you open in presents. Think of the terrible misery that goes on in the world today and what's happening to these people who just want to live like we do. And we take it so for granted. And I guess I'm one of them who take it for granted. Here's one more clip from Yvonne about the regime that do this.
Generally, Christians stay aside and then they support whatever regime takes place. This is the history of the Christian church in the Middle East. It's the way it has survived. It doesn't take sides. But each side wants them to take a side. And so they get caught in the middle. And there aren't many in the Islamic groups that are saying, you know, you're full citizens with us. We will give you full privileges. So they're worried.
And that's what happened to the Coptics in Egypt. They were finally caught with Morsi as the president, and there was no one to support. So when it was time to get rid of him and bring the military back in, they what could they do? They were stuck. They were stuck for maybe throughout history. Both sides want the Christians, as she said, to choose. They just want to be left alone. And maybe that's part of the problem. They've gotten so used to being martyrs in their own country, especially in the Middle East, unlike what's happening in China, where the growth of Christianity is huge. And it's 110 of 1.6 billion. What if it's to be 210, 310? So this is a rough climate for people. We'll play one more clip before we go to the conclusion here. But this is it's Hershey Ali, about a Somali activist on what's going on.
By Ayaan Hirsi Ali, described as a Somali Dutch feminist, writer, and politician. She says the world often hears complaints about Muslims victimized by the West. But she writes, in fact, a wholly different kind of war is underway, an unrecognized battle costing thousands of lives. Christians are being killed in the Islamic world because of their religion. It is a rising genocide that ought to provoke global alarm. Ali says the West needs to use financial and diplomatic pressure against offending countries.
And that's it. You know, we need to have, and we need to be united as Americans, as part of our foreign policy. And believe me, we can't always get things right to where we want them every time. There's countries we have to deal with. But we don't have to make pretenses that they're really our allies. And we should always be speaking out. I mean, why would the premier of China, the president of China, come to a state dinner? Why would he be at a state dinner in America when what they're doing is so oppressive on all fronts? But this show is about the Christians. And it's not just about, by the way, we should be decrying when Muslims are oppressing Muslims, or if Christians are oppressing Muslims somewhere. But we should make it part of our policy, and we should be speaking out, and we should be withholding money. And we should be talking about it. And we should be addressing leaders. I mean, we didn't even cover. I mean, President Obama, besides the several disasters that happened at Nelson Mandela's funeral, you just don't go shake hands with a tyrant. But that's where it's come to. Well, we're out of time. Solutions are not as specific as we'd like them to be, but we're not doing anything about it. But Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We appreciate you tuning in. We're going to have a happier show tomorrow. We're going to have our Christmas show. I think even Boss Hogg is going to call in. I'm not sure. We'll talk about Christmas in the real sense. We'll also do some stuff about Santa and so forth. But it's Steve Laffey. We appreciate you listening to such a hard-hitting show. Tune in tomorrow for another one. Be a little bit lighthearted. Talk to you tomorrow. God bless you.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.